Well, here we go again with episode 3 of That Time I Got Reincarnated in the Same World as an Anime Podcaster. I'm Isekai Sensei Sama, aka Brad, and I'm joined in the Weeb Cabal by Kermit D. Grog, aka Andrew.
Yo, yo, yo! Ready to talk about the anime.
And Bento Baggins, aka Ben.
Mushi mushi, bento des.
Thanks for coming back and listening to us again. If you haven't heard us before, we are a group of friends who have been watching anime together for a couple years, and we always have fun discussions related to anime and manga, and we decided that we were going to record those conversations so that other people could enjoy them too. So we hope you enjoy this. Before we get into everything, don't forget to check us out on social media and let us know what you think about this. Even if you don't listen to the whole thing, we'd love to hear from you. So for our discussion today, I wanted to ask you guys how you feel that shonen manga and anime, the protagonists, the main characters of those, have changed over the years. For me, I look at the recent anime, things like Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer. I look at the main characters, and this is something that we've discussed in the past, where your modern shonen protagonist is, and I believe this is Andrew's term, they are sweet boys. As in...
Well, if you're just going to take my words, why don't I give you my little elevator pitch on what kind of inspired this? What
I really want to know is how you feel that they are different enough to be, their own category of thing, as opposed to, an Edward Elric or a Naruto or Ichigo from Bleach, something like that.
Okay, let me spin you my tapestry. Let me spin you my yarn.
Oh, he's got to get comfortable.
I was thinking on this. So it was the idea, as Brad so lovingly said, of like, we're in the era of the sweet boy. The 3 most popular shonen anime manga going on right now is My Hero Academia with Deku, Jujutsu Kaisen with, I don't remember his name sadly because I'm terrible with names. Itadori, nice one. And also the main character of Demon Slayer, whose name I also forget because I'm terrible with names. Thank you, Tanjiro. Are all like empathetic sweet boys. They're not like overly cocky. They seem to take extra effort to care about people. They're not like quippy really. Not to say that they're like nothing, but it feels like they're empathetic, but not one-dimensional in that. So what really then, when we were watching all those, was going back to, as Brad was talking about, we started watching through the old Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and just getting hit with this waft of like the 90s and early to mid 2000s of Edward Elric just being like, his whole bit is like, I'm a firecracker, I talk back to people, everybody calls me short and I swear at them, and it feels very like, authority, I'm the young guy, I know what's up. And like Naruto's very much in that, from what I'm told. I guess Ichigo from Bleach is also that, and I'm sure there's others, but that there's that kind of that rebellion, Rage Against the Machine thing of like the 90s and the early 2000s of, this is, we're rebelling against what we've been doing. And then you go back further and you get, and admittedly this is where my examples fall apart a little bit, at least in the shonen category, but you get like a Dragon Ball, or I don't know if Yu Yu Hakusho fits this. Ben and Brad, you'll have to help me with that one, where it's like, it's a lot more straightforward. It's like, here is the hero, they do good. They're not always one-dimensional, but they are usually a lot more just sort of a straightforward good guy trying to do their best. Like a Jonathan Joestar, feels very fitting to that. He is literally just a good guy as much as he can be.
There was something that struck me because I was thinking about this in the lead up to this conversation, which is there's like an emotional difference between these modern characters and the older characters. I feel like, and I don't have any specific examples for this, but I feel like our modern characters, your Tanjiro, your Midoriya, are more widely emotional, as in more emotions are visible, whereas with a lot of the older shonen protagonists, you've got sort of the only visible emotions tend to be like anger or happiness.
Attack and protect.
Right. And so, there's Naruto's a really good example of this because you have, Talk no Jutsu, where Naruto is making all the villains come over to his side by just talking at them for a while. Obviously, that's the trope there. But, like, you don't really get the emotional weight of, like, oh, he's sad for them. It's more like, hey, why are you doing this? There's a better way. Whereas I can see Tanjiro or Midoriya confronting a villain and being upset at their situation, what made them become a villain in the first place. Does that make any sense?
Because and this is part of my, like, bigger thing that, like, as I thought about this more, expanded out from just both even just shonen anime and then anime in general, was that it was like, until fairly recently, being empathetic and having emotions, especially as a dude, wasn't like a cool thing. Mm-hmm. A man, like, you're never gonna see like a Kenshiro, or I guess early JoJo he kind of did, but like, you're never gonna see like a tough Kenshiro of these earlier shonen battlers like crying and really emoting that much, or like a Guts. Like, it's, I guess, not always the greatest example. And I think because recently, I'd say as a culture, but like this is kind of in America and elsewhere, where it was like, it's cooler to be those things, to have that full gamut of emotions, that you don't need to just be this like, I'm Goku, I punch things and I'm hungry and ha ha ha. Like, it was like you didn't, in the beginning, you just didn't feel those feelings really. And then it, like, in the 90s and 2000s, it was actively not cool to be genuine about things, because everything was, like, ironic and kind of, it's the 90s, it's gross, it's blah, whatever authority. And then I feel like as we moved on to where we are kind of now in the last decade or more, where it's like we kind of, and then maybe this is just because it's the generation we're growing up in, it's like a bigger thing, but it's like we got through that rebellious teen phase in those years, and then now we're kind of in the more adult thing. We're not just in the little kid thing where it's like, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy, the bad guy's the villain, he wants to do the villainous things because whatever, here's the good guy, they want to be heroic, so they want to do that. And then people got tired of that, and we started doing like, well, why is it like that? Let's, edgy things, the anti-hero, let's start like tearing it apart and picking at it. Like, we don't need to do the things that our parents did. And I feel like now it was just like all of that sarcasm and like darkness is kind of really exhausting, and the world's on fire enough. Let's have fun. Let's still have heroes and villains, but like, let's be more empathetic and understanding, because we've got so much connection to the world and other people. We know everybody's stories that it's like, it's so hard to do now, just like here's a bad guy, they're a villain, because
that was definitely my line of thinking as well, in terms of like the cultural acceptability of showing emotions, being in touch with your emotions. Empathy was something that you, like, your classic 90s thing, early 2000s, like, you could have empathy for someone, but you couldn't let it reflect on you.
You couldn't show it in a meaningful way, or it had to come out in a different, it's like, oh, they rag on you, but they love you, and it's like, because they could just love you. Because,
like, the example of Naruto is, he was empathetic to all of those villains, otherwise he wouldn't have, taken the time to convert them. He would just beaten their ass. But he wasn't, taking their emotions on.
He was also a loudmouth knucklehead. That was the problem I had with Edward Elric, where it's just like, his actions, and everybody says like, oh, he's a good dude, but it's just like, it's annoying when every other moment is like, you called me short, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting to always be like on all the time with this. It's like, couldn't we just kind of roll with it and accept things? Like,
there's two things. There's the complexity of the story itself, and then there's the range of emotion that the protagonist is allowed to show.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, to me, Naruto and Fullmetal Alchemist especially, are kind of like bridge series from the 90s to early 2000s delinquent era into the more complex storytelling. Like, to me, I think Fullmetal Alchemist is a more emotionally complicated story than Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer seems pretty straight up good versus evil most of the time. And I haven't read the whole thing. I'm just watching with the show, so maybe there's something I don't know yet.
Well, I don't know, because even to as far as we've gotten, which probably the people listening to this are farther along in the second season than even we are.
Yeah.
But in the first season, we saw what you would call good demons. Like they've introduced the moral complexity of not all demons are bad. Obviously, you have Nezuko, but like there's also other demons who are like, no, we're not going to eat people. We just want to survive and be at peace.
Right, but I don't think that goes anywhere near as deep as Full Metal Alchemist with the complexities of like the military co-opting science and science being for the people and then going into developing weapons. And
see, I didn't think that Full Metal Alchemist was that complex, sort of even from the beginning, because they basically right away were like, look what the government did to this other country.
I would say, and this was another part of my thesis on all this, is that we came out on the other end of the 90s and early 2000s like pessimism into an optimism, but it was an optimism tempered with an understanding of reality that I didn't think was as present in the earlier work, which just here is hero, here is villain. And the 90s, it was just like, again, it's like you're bucking against the authority and the established, and you're specifically putting your thumb in the eye of all that. And now it's just like, it's not that you don't do that, but it's just like it's matured. We've kind of chilled out a little bit. We're kind of more understanding. We can be empathetic, but also understanding of just like, yeah, there's some messed up stuff out there and we need to talk about it, but it doesn't feel as like, look at this, look at how corrupt this government is. And maybe some of that maybe just be, I got older as I was watching it. That's the always caveat with all this and why I wanted to have this conversation was it's like, I don't know if it's me growing up with this stuff and then looking back on it as current me and going, wow, this is kind of a little too edgy for its own good, but it needed to happen because we're not in the space that it was rebelling in anymore. We're in the space after it. So a lot of the things that were maybe breaking new ground then are kind of like hackneyed now.
I mean, we're definitely looking at this through the lens of anime, but I think that it also applies to like most media of the time.
Yeah,
if you look at
even in America, yeah, 100%.
If you look at like the popularity of certain genres of music over that time, I think there's a sort of a parallel to that. I mean, if you look at the rebellious music genres, you know, your punk or whatever that was popular around the same time. And, you know, I'm sure there's movie examples, although I'm drawing blank right now, of you know, other forms of media, probably books as well, where that whole time period was, like you had said, the rebellious teenager period.
Yeah, and it's not like, the thing I always want to clarify is, in all eras, there are always things that are emotionally complex, that are rebellious, like even, obviously, dating back to the 60s, freaking rock and roll and all that, and punk came around in the 70s and the 80s. It's not that these things weren't around, but it's just, I guess in this medium of, like, art and cartoons and storytelling like that, I feel like you can see major eras, because even now there are things that are kind of edgy being made now, and there are also things that are very simple being made now. But it's, I feel like what you point to is what is popular at this moment.
Right. There's like an overall popularity of a way of being, sort of, and it's not the only thing that's there at the time. But then I also feel like it's cyclical, because like you said, there was that rebellious period in the 60s, which sort of matches up a lot with the rebellion of the 90s, even though the aesthetic of it was fairly different. But both of them were sort of expressing the same thing, which is we are our own thing. Don't, you know, put your ideals on us. We're going to express ourselves in our own way. We're a new generation kind of thing. And then what you see after that is sort of a softening of it while keeping the individualism from it. You know, the 70s and the 80s were still about that, you know, the individual in that way, but it wasn't as harsh and rebellious as it was before. And the 80s probably isn't a good example, but, you know, sort of like the after period of that rebellion was more of a coming together, you know, being your own person, but understanding others. So I think, I mean, from that, looking at it from that standpoint, we're probably going to get another rebellious period in what 20 years or so, or less.
I mean, maybe like that's the thing that's interesting now, where it's just like you can go in any direction. Like I don't know if you stop having understanding for other people, because it's not like it's always hard to, because like you said, there's always a cycle to things, but it's like you never know how much at any given point technology can change something, where it's just like before, where you were just born in your town and that's what you had. We've gone so off the rails for anime. And even to anime, it's like you, instead of having, and we talked about this last time, instead of being stuck with what is directly available to you, everything is available to you. Ideas,
true,
like media you can consume, like you have. And I was talking about, like, it's why empathy is, I feel like, more in vogue now, and hopefully I'm genuinely hoping it sticks around because I think it's good for people. You have access to so many people's stories that you didn't have back in the day, that you didn't have that understanding. I feel like that's part of the rise of, in the last couple decades, like the popularity of villains, of just, these are people who are misunderstood, or just they're going through their own troubles, and having that empathy to go, this is, and you learn their tragic backstories of just like, hey, they're dealing with this and that's why they're here.
Right.
And you can kind of have that empathy as a viewer to go, I don't want to just see them like beat up. That seems like not a solution to the problem, There
is something that I personally sort of am missing in this conversation, which is my knowledge of this subject sort of only goes back to the mid 90s, because, I'm my consumption of anime really only goes back that far. I never really looked at the older stuff. So it makes me wonder, like, we saw this progression from when we were kids until now, but was there specifically in anime, because I mentioned, music genres and stuff, and we saw that with the 60s, but is there a precursor to the evolution that we saw earlier than that? And did it mirror what we're seeing now, or was, because the technology, I guess, for animation wasn't as robust as it is now, were things simpler and it didn't really explore those complex topics?
So I have a really biased version of the 80s for anime because...
Lay it down.
Well, it's just simply because what made it over that I was consuming in the 80s, or from the 80s, I was 2 in the 80s, but what made it over was obviously different than what makes it over today. So,
which is everything.
It tended to be seinen, not shonen. Mm-hmm. So it targeted a little older audience. You got your Fist of the North Star, Akira. It was mostly stuff that was brought over for big comic book heads who were teen to young adult, not so much the target shonen demographic. So I don't have a good sampling of that, but I think in terms of cycles, there's kind of 3 big moments in Japanese history, and I'm going to grossly simplify the 60s to 80s. But
yeah, go for it.
After World War,
I can't stop you. I don't know any better than you do.
Well, we don't want this to run for 3 hours.
I'm not gonna go too long.
Don't Dan Carlin me.
After the Japanese are like everyone else, but more so. That's the Dan Carlin attitude. So Japanese post World War II have the economic miracle, which is where, through sheer force of will, the Japanese economy boosts up into the top economy in Asia and then top 3 in the world.
I played Yakuza 0. You fight people on the street and punching them literally like money coming out. That's how much it was booming.
Yeah.
Totally real.
And so I think that's kind of one big period of shonen protagonist. What does it mean to be a Japanese man in that society? It means you're hyper competent, you go to work, you work real hard, you sacrifice, you work hard, you die noble.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. Then the 90s come, and Japan goes through a recession it has not come out of yet. And the economic miracle's kind of over, for the first time, Japanese men are in a company that's not going to take care of them for the rest of their lives. It's like the first time Japan sees layoffs.
But they don't know that yet.
They don't know it, but it's starting to happen. Companies start to lay people off. The future doesn't look so great. There's higher levels of unemployment. And I would say, in my own, like, this is a hypothesis. I could be proven wrong.
I mean, that's what this episode is.
Yeah.
Us just sort of positing ideas.
But I would
This is a preamble.
say that the popularity of the delinquent starts sort of in the 90s when faith in the system is at an all-time low. That's when you move from your Goku to your Yu Yu Hakusho, to your Yusuke Urameshi, who's ditching school. Like that's not a noble thing. He's not doing what he's supposed to do, but he's somehow the hero. And I think that was an edgy take itself, because these manga are aimed at kids. You don't want to make it look cool to be a delinquent,
But
and that's something that sort of just struck me, is that like we're looking at these from the standpoint of these age groups that are consuming it. You know, we were young kids and we were consuming this certain thing and it spoke to us, but the people making it aren't the same age. In most cases, they're much older
and have a different idea set.
Right,
Living
and so
in Japan.
And have an editor telling them what is and is not going to work and what they can get away with. And
so it makes me wonder,
we're not
like,
even the intended audience.
Obviously, they, in a lot of cases, they got it right and spoke to their audience. But the people making it had grown up in a drastically different society than the one that they were currently in. And the market that they were aiming at was growing up in. So it's sort of interesting. I don't really have anywhere to go with this other than it's an interesting thought that we were shaped by people that were older than us, even though we didn't know it, you know?
Well, and I was going to say, one of the big differences I notice, in at least the anime that made it over to me, was it tended to be your Akiras, your Fist of the North Stars, your Dragon Balls, where they were all mimicking movies, action movies. Like, to me, the 80s shonen manga is shonen action movie, because Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball is just every Bruce Lee movie, because it always culminates in a tournament. There's always the stereotypical like old master and then young guy surpasses him and all that stuff. Fist of the North Star is just a big 80s post-apocalypse movie. Akira's some cyberpunk dystopian action movie. And they're all, like, even JoJo that came out around that same time, there's a reason JoJo looks exactly like Sylvester Stallone.
Well, he didn't then.
But
he does now, but he didn't then.
But the 90s come along and nobody cares about that stuff anymore. There's disillusionment cropping up and kids are starting to get into the counterculture. And counterculture, I think, is a relatively new thing in Japan. Whereas in America, in the 80s, they deregulated advertising for children, like advertising directly to children, and so you get Saturday morning cartoons.
Correct.
Which was both excellent and terrible.
That was just terrible.
Well, you get your Transformers, your He-Mans, I mean, everything that was based on a Hasbro
Everything
toy.
that's around now.
Well, even
Well, not
probably
everything, but
My Little Pony and all that.
I know.
It's
I know, don't worry.
But I think that's where some of the influences are different between America and Japan in terms of the media. But the 90s into the 2000s, in the early 2000s, we have another kind of weird bridge period where we get Full Metal Alchemist and Death Note. And I think One Piece started around 98.
I feel like One Piece is sort of an outlier.
One Piece it's been going so long because it's been in all of these segments, and it's it both does things at the beginning of the spectrum and the middle of the spectrum and at the end of the spectrum.
The thing is,
it's both very straightforward, but it is also very complicated and very resident of today's world of like the government's really effed up and we're going to do something about it.
Yeah, it strikes me that just looking at Luffy in particular, he was sort of an outlier character at the like when One Piece started, because he sort of skirts the line of all these other categories that we're putting these shonen protagonists in, because there was basically no point where there was any shying away from emotions. He had the full spectrum basically from the jump.
But he's also a bit of a throwback. He's very Goku. He fights, he eats, he literally eats giant cartoon meat. Like other people, the world around him is a lot more complicated emotionally than Luffy is.
Well, and that's what I was going to say with Light and with Edward Elric, with Death Note and Fullmetal Alchemist, is both of them stay like very stereotypical masculine manly man values. Like Edward Elric's still fighting badass who takes his shirt off. Light is a conformist secret psychopath, but he directly fulfills the stereotypical Japanese
I am
young
in
man.
power.
Well, he's the best student. He's going to get the best job. He respects his father to his face. And then the world around them turns those expectations on their head a little bit, where both Edward and Light have to, they wind up not conforming to the society, and the society winds up being the problem. Or with Light, it kind of shows this guy is everything you said you wanted, but he's actually a secret monster who's just executing people willy-nilly. But he gets a cult and everybody loves him, and they kind of deconstruct it a little bit. And so there's all these bridge stories where the protagonist is still kind of trapped in some of the more, I'm going to use the buzzword toxic masculine tropes, but they're starting to evolve. Like the world around, they're starting to tell a different story with that than just strong guy gets stronger, beats strong guy. And then you get into the 2010s and now the 2020s. Feminism is in full swing in Japan. It's still lagging behind, I think, the West just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, the West might be regressing in that regard.
No, the West is doing,
I think,
depending on where you're looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole bigger topic that I'm not qualified to talk about.
At least in my world, the world has never been more gay than it has ever been. So.
Well, and that's, gay marriage is still not legal in Japan. And the divide between pay between men and women is still very wide in Japan compared to the West.
I have to keep comically pulling at my collar when they make new Persona games, and there's like, oh, guys, you're so good on so many things. Why did you screw this up?
But this was also a change in Japanese masculinity, because for a long time, women didn't work, or they worked until they got married and then they quit. And they raised the kids, and the dad was almost never seen. Now
we're seeing how much of a problem that is.
Yeah. But now they're starting to have, like, I read one article where a Japanese guy said his wife basically met him at the door one day and said, I need you to play a role in our children's lives. I need you to be a parent half the time. And he said, no, that's your role as a wife. And she divorced him, and he never saw it coming.
Hell yeah.
But there's a lot of shifting going on right now into men taking care of kids. And now you have a protagonist like Tanjiro, he's not just taking care of his family by going out and working real hard. He's actually emotionally available to his family in the flashbacks. Now but he was still.
Wait, what happened to his family?
Yeah. Spoiler.
Family.
But you also get, Itadori Yuji, who is more.
He's a little less, admittedly. Like, he is still a sweet boy, but he doesn't fit as much with the other two. But, like, 3 is a powerful number, and you kind of want to You want to tap it into place. So
Well, I'd still say he's more emotionally honest.
yeah,
I feel like Itadori is emotionally available for everyone in his life.
he's my favorite of the trio because he's still got some of that over the top energy, but he feels more grounded because he doesn't like pop back at, like, he jokes around with his friends, but it's not like, I always keep going back to like a Naruto or Elric, like he's not just like yelling at people. There's not comedy through just them constantly getting on each other's nerves.
Why was that so popular?
I don't know. I was thinking about that recently. I don't remember what I was watching. I think just thinking about like Dragon Ball, watching old Dragon Ball, and it's just like gaslighting people was just like a thing of comedy in old Japan.
Yeah,
I don't know
and
what
like
it is. And I kinda hated
smacking
it.
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? Like rewatching older stuff, it's like 1 time out of 10 that it actually works. But it's so often.
Comedy ages like milk. Go watch a Looney Tunes episode.
You know, you say that, but there's so much
Some
older
comedy.
comedy.
Some isn't, but it's just.
I guess
think,
it's the comedy that
we've
that
talked
lasts that we are pointed to and say, look, this old comedy's good.
Well, we've talked about before the cultural divide on what's funny is different across cultures over time as well. So we've got 2 axes of measurement that we are very far off the base of.
There's one interesting example that I wanted to bring up in Dragon Ball, because we sort of have a evolution of shonen protagonist in a single
Dragon Ball evolution, if you will.
Well,
No.
I'm gonna
Thanks, man.
ignore.
That's the right answer. Is no.
Let's ignore that one. But so we start off with Dragon Ball, the original series, where Goku's a kid, and you've got that classic shonen battler kind
Well,
of
even
thing.
before it's that, it's a gag manga that becomes that.
Right. And then you move on to Dragon Ball Z, where it becomes that edgy shonen battler, right? And then now with Dragon Ball Super, because Dragon Ball GT was definitely still that was even more edgy. Like they just cranked it up with that. But we can ignore GT just like everyone else. But then what you have with Dragon Ball Super, and I'll preface this with, I have not watched Dragon Ball Super. I don't have a ton of knowledge on it. But there's another step there where from what I've seen, Goku doesn't seem drastically different from Dragon Ball Z, but it seems like everyone around him has grown more.
Everybody's going to point to Vegeta having, like, Vegeta refuses to participate in the Tournament of Power until his daughter is born because his wife will be mad at him.
Oh, like that's sweet. Like that is the thing of the villain becomes like. We had an entire podcast on that. I think on a different show. I think on my show we talked about that.
Are Vegeta and Goku different sides of the personality, the id and the super ego?
We are wandering off into the wilderness.
The Ultra Instinct and the Ultra Ego, yes. Because that's literally the powers they both have developed.
Oh, I didn't know
Wait,
Ultra
is
Ego was a
Ultra
thing.
Ego
I thought you were just doing a bit off of Ultra.
Vegeta just got a new form in the manga, Ultra Ego.
Dope.
What is it?
It's more God of Destruction power. So Goku's got the angel powers of Ultra Instinct, and Vegeta's going the
What
God
color does his hair turn? Because I know
Purple.
Ultra Instinct was white. Purple.
So
Yeah, I
he
guess
looks like Beerus.
I kind of dig that.
Yeah.
I've got no horse in this race.
I'm not going to read it, but that
I'm not gonna
sounds
read
interesting.
it either, but it's just like
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's they both have taken on the approach of trying to, because they're all so powerful, it's not even really going to work to try to play the same game of like more powerful guy. So they've kind of taken the approach of like, how are Goku and Vegeta going to make this, how are they going to fix this situation? Like one arc, they have to be space cops. Like they literally join the space cops and they're buddy cops.
that sounds great. That sounds fun.
Yeah,
Let's
and
go play baseball.
one arc, they're both trying to help this guy get revenge for his fallen race, and Vegeta's, Goku tries to talk him out of it and fails, and Vegeta's like, I know a thing or two about revenge. This is what you're gonna do.
Great.
You're gonna fight this fight. It's your fight.
I would hold Dragon Ball in its entirety, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, up against like One Piece.
Yeah.
Or you could probably also use Naruto Shippuden, Boruto.
But that would require us to have seen Boruto.
I would hesitate to use that example, but
I think you mean Boruto's dad, Shippuden, and Boruto.
anyway,
That grimace that Brad made was
let's put the focus where the people really want it.
like I said, I think with One Piece, Luffy is fairly consistent, even though it's been going for 20 years or something like that now. Whereas with the Dragon Ball or Naruto, there's very clear growth. Really the only growth that Luffy goes through is his actual strength. His emotional core was evolved at the beginning of the series. Like, he was a complete emotional person to start with. He just had a clear goal.
But everybody around him, like, that's the weird thing about One Piece, is Luffy is such a Goku, but the entire world and the rest of his crew and other people he runs into, there's all this tragic stuff. And admittedly, that's one of the reasons I like One Piece, and what I like about way Oda writes. It's like, if you can't keep all that straight in your head, at the end of the day, you've got your buddy Luffy, and he's going to get a cool new power, and he's going to break through the barriers, and he's going to punch somebody.
You know, that's interesting.
And I like things that have the entire spectrum of, you can enjoy it at its most basic level, but if you want to dig into it, there is so much stuff for you to dig at whatever level you want to get into it at. And that, I think, is what makes One Piece special.
I think you're right in that, like, Goku didn't really emotionally evolve.
No.
You know, he's made strides in, like, learning his own limits and stuff like that in cases, and then breaking through them. But he didn't emotionally evolve, even though I would argue he needs to.
Yeah, no, Goku still has no idea why getting himself killed is harmful to his family. He literally just says, "Hey, see you when you die."
But I feel like now it's just what he does. It's just he's become, it's Goku.
So
to change Goku would be weird, because he's not. Then he wouldn't be Goku. It's too late. He's been around too long to do something drastic.
Yeah. So in something like One Piece, it's fun to watch everything going on around, and then you have that sort of rock solid core of Luffy, of like you said, like, at the end of the day, he's your boy, he's there for you. Whereas with Goku, you're sort of just getting dragged along with the journey.
That's actually, I like that verb choice is really good. I like drags along. It's just like you're going to go along.
Right. Nobody has a choice. Yeah. Goku doesn't give anyone a choice.
He's one of the most powerful beings in the universe.
We're going to bet our entire existence on this tournament that I am saying we're going to be in.
I forgot to take the heart pills, even though you came back in time and gave me the heart pills.
Yeah, like, Goku's sort of a terrible person.
That's a podcast for a different time.
Toriyama would agree. He never wanted Goku to be a hero.
No.
So
he's definitely succeeded. But is everyone else in error in looking at him as a hero?
Goku has redeeming qualities in that he doesn't give a shit what anybody is doing, and he's very, like, his mind is so open his brain is falling out. That's kind of the problem. And so his only real redeeming quality is his constant drive to improve himself. And that's the reason he keeps showing all his opponents mercy. He doesn't really show them mercy. He wants to fight them again. That's what it's about. That's what it's always been about.
He's fairly simplistic. He is a relic. He is a dinosaur living in now times.
No, he's kind of like Luffy in the sense that he also doesn't really understand what's going on.
Right, but
Luffy has a better understanding of what's going on, I would say.
Yeah, and it sort of matters less, because Luffy's goal is, while potentially selfish,
I'm going to be king of the pirates. Like,
yeah.
But it's like the thing that you as the reader are along for is learning about the world and, like,
and Luffy isn't
One Piece is.
Luffy isn't putting innocent people in danger for his selfish things.
No, he's never really selfish. At the moments he does that, he usually triumphs in the end.
So Andrew, you pitched this topic apparently, which I missed. Do you think we've covered everything?
I think so, but I want to kind of tie it in of this, because the last time I talked about this, I had this, like, big emotional moment with it. So if you can follow me for a quick sojourn out of anime into Western animation, where I'm admittedly even a little bit more knowledgeable of things, of these three sort of eras that I've been describing, of the kind of beginning times where it's like things are fairly simplistic, they're not as rebellious. And then you get into your 90s, 2000s where things are very just kind of, they're a lot more mean and pessimistic and sarcastic, and showing true emotion is, paramount to suicide. And now we're in now where it's like, hey, the world's kind of messed up. We've gone through this section, and now we have understanding. We're not ignoring that the world is bad, but we're choosing to be a little bit more understanding and hopeful about it. Maybe not always hopeful, but so the way I'm going to capture that was what we talked before. You have the 80s where you have like a He-Man or you're old Hanna-Barbera. Everything is very straightforward. And then as you move into the 90s and early 2000s, you get your Ren and Stimpies and your Invader Zims. And admittedly, I'm cherry picking a little bit to get my point across the strongest, but you have things that are very mean, but are very much attacking the system they came from, and of people kind of sick of what's going on, and as Ben said with the anime stuff, mistrust of the system, of leadership, of all that thing, and just actively biting against it. You have the freaking Rise of Newgrounds, which is just a cesspit of which admittedly I was also brought up in, but just completely oh, we're gonna freaking, it's Duck Hunt, but we're gonna use a gun and there's gonna be blood, and it just feels very childish teenage, but it's just we grew up in this really safe situation, so let's just start tearing things up. I feel it's at that point, if something is remade, it's done very cynically. Yeah, superhero movies are done oh, these capes justice, bleh. It's just very, there's a lot of malice for what came before. And then in the now, my key one that I always point to is Steven Universe is such a send-up of other things, but is so much just, I feel it is the most indicative of now. It's about, hey, there's a lot of messed up stuff. There is history we are still dealing with as this new generation that's really effed up, but we just have to deal with it, and we're trying to understand ourselves and solve problems. And in that way of the remake, from you were also saying of saying a He-Man or a My Little Pony, of now instead of going really cynically at this came from a capitalist thing, it's almost it's a reclaiming thing. As somebody, I don't know if I've said it yet on this anime podcast, of somebody who was really into the new generation of My Little Pony, it was literally from the creator was this is something I grew up with. I'm gonna make it my own thing now. It's not this this very pessimistic, this thing I grew up, it was garbage, it wasn't made well. It was this is something that was special to me, empathy, feelings, and I'm gonna make it into something more than it was, as a sort of heralding it along instead of gouging it out and all these old Hanna-Barbera things were garbage, we're gonna just completely tear them to pieces and make fun of them, instead of kind of having empathy for it and understanding of it. So that's kind of my big denouement point of all this. Is I personally am very happy we're in this generation of having more understanding about things, and that being in the media that we grew up, that kids aren't growing up with the freaking, kids are still getting bits of rebellion. I don't think that flame ever is going to die out now, but it's not wrapped in such mean, nasty cynicism that I just don't think is long-term viable. We're getting in a more, again, I keep coming back to it, empathy, understanding, being genuine. And I feel that across all media is becoming more of a thing. Maybe just it's in the media that I'm paying attention to. Maybe that's the stuff I'm drawn towards. Obviously, all these types of things are always being made, but of what is popular and getting big, stuff like that is happening more and more. And I for one, greatly appreciate it and hope we see more of it.
I have to agree. I think, in all of the media that I consume these days, I think that empathy is a more central theme of a lot of things. And I agree with you. I'm happy with where we're at now. I have more favorite things that are modern than I ever had of, older things. And I have plenty of favorite things that, older favorite things, but I'm happy with where we're at right now.
Ben, any closing remarks?
Cycles.
I know I pitched you a lot of things.
No, I was gonna say just cycles. I agree. I don't know. I feel I'm watching some of my childhood's hippies become boomers as time goes on. Harry Potter, but John Cleese.
Goes in cycles.
It goes in cycles, but no, our youth culture is probably the best youth culture.
Pretty cool.
There's another evolution that I've seen in a lot of my personal favorite media, and by that, I'm sure you know that I'm talking about isekai. There's an interesting subgenre of isekai that's become incredibly popular in just the last couple years, like 2 years, maybe more, and that is the villainous isekai.
Okay.
So, what the villainous isekai is if you're familiar with classic fairy tales where you have like a Cinderella, in that story there is like the evil stepmom or the evil stepsisters. There is a villainess, a classic trope of a fairy tale where there's a commoner who's very beautiful and catches the eye of the prince, and the prince already has a fiance, or there's someone who's going to be their fiance or whoever, and that person is the villainess of the story because they are like, how could the prince like this commoner? How terrible is this? And then they bully the commoner, and then the prince finds out, and oh, we're not gonna get married now. How could you be so cruel? And now I'm gonna marry this commoner.
I was gonna say, speaking of reclaiming dated themes.
Well, the protagonist of those stories is the heroine. It's the commoner woman or girl who's very beautiful and is sweet and innocent and everything. What you're seeing recently is applying isekai to that, but not having the isekai protagonist be the heroine in that instance. They become the villainous character. And there's a myriad of ways that these go. In some cases, the person is like, oh, I have to complete the story, so I'm going to actually act like a villainess. In some cases, they say, oh, I'm not going to follow this at all, and then everybody falls in love with them. One of the most famous ones recently is My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom. It's a very popular one. There's an anime of it now, and in that one, the main character becomes the villainess of this story, and instead of following the story, mostly because she doesn't actually know the full story, she just has bits and pieces, but she ends up just being sweet and trying to avoid her death flags. And in the process, every other character, including the girls and the heroine of the original story, fall in love with her. It's a comedy, though, and it's great because she doesn't even know that they're all in love with her. She's just so sweet and innocent and dumb that she doesn't catch on at all, and they're all fighting each other over her.
So it's like the heroine, it's somebody else, but it's the person who had the traits of the heroine is now in the villainess.
Right.
So there's like this almost reversal of personality.
Now, the thing that we've seen is this became so popular so quickly. There's so many of them now.
Which is such a baffling concept to me.
There's countless manga and there are countless manhwa, and now you're seeing all these anime that have it over and over again. There's a couple that I think are just like top tier, but there's ones that have sort of accelerated the evolution of this and just gone super meta. And there's two specifically that I wanted to talk about. Both of these are manhwa that I've been reading. The first one is called Who Made Me a Princess? And the other one is called It's Time to Change the Genre.
Oh, that sounds very... I love isekai very much like it says what it does on the tin. Yeah. I appreciate that.
On the surface, both of these
Demon Slayer.
On the surface, they're both very straightforward. You have a modern day Japanese or Korean person who something happens to them and they end up in this story that they were reading. In this case, it's they are the villainess in the story and they decide, I'm not going to follow the story. The interesting thing, and if you're going to read these, I'm going to spoil some of it right now, but what we find as we go through these, and this is the evolution part, is that what actually happened in these is that they were originally the people they are in the story and they were the Villainess. They died and were reincarnated in Korea, and then died there and went back into it. So there's a double cycle.
So when you die, you go into this villainous story.
Right.
But when you die there, when you die in the game, you resurrect in real life.
Yes.
It's an isekai within an isekai.
Exactly.
Within an isekai.
And it's really interesting to me because
It's 2 sekais deep.
It's re-isekai-nation. I gotta workshop that one.
to be honest, it doesn't play into the story that much. They're just good stories, but I think it's a really interesting thing because they do use it to an extent. They sort of play off of like, oh, the story exists in Korea and that they are in the real world, our real world that they were reading because they sort of manifested it when they were reincarnated into the real world.
Brad, if I were to read this, would I be missing things, the fact that I haven't read any others, or do you think I'd pick up on the tropes pretty quickly it's trying to...
So these two are, all of the top quality manga and manhwa that I would ever even talk about are good enough that you're not going to miss anything by not having previous knowledge.
Okay.
If you've never read an isekai before, you can get into it.
Because I was going to suggest that I would pick one of these two and read a number of chapters, and then next episode report back and going, hey, I've gone on this journey. I'm not Professor Isekai Sensei-sama, but I am big into, like, meta and messing with, like, character tropes. I mean, I literally wrote a paper in college about, like, Disney heroes and villains and fairy tale storybook stuff. So, like...
Well, it might be a little difficult for you to do that. Who Made Me a Princess is actually coming to an end pretty soon. And I want to say there's like 150 chapters.
Well, no, I'm not reading all of it, but like putting a dent into it.
Right, but what I'm...
reporting back.
The fact that she is a reincarnator doesn't come up until like chapter 80. So that's pretty deep in. The other one, It's Time to Change the Genre. The official translation of that is only on like chapter 35. But we don't find out any of that reincarnation stuff besides the initial like, oh, this is an isekai. We haven't even heard that yet. The only reason I know about that is because for some reason, everyone who reads shoujo manhwa is a glutton for spoilers. So all the comment sections are just full of spoilers.
Interesting. What a culture.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I do it too. They have the little spoiler tag for the comment sections, and you see it, and you gotta click on it.
Click on it. No,
I don't know why.
It's the soap opera digest of our times.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pick those ones out specifically because we were talking about the evolution of shonen protagonists specifically, and that's one that I've seen such a fast evolution for. Well, I guess isekai is a virus, isn't it?
Isekai is, I'm going to call upon all of our professions, Isekai is agile development. It is constantly changing. There's no waterfall method here. It doesn't just begin and end and then it's done. It is constantly, it is a vastly evolving organism that is constantly changing depending on what the world is, what's going on in the world and other things that have come out.
Yeah.
I was going to say isekai has the most, like, meme subgenres, but as I was thinking about saying that, I was like, I am nearing peak teenagers fighting demons.
Yeah.
So shonen might have a similar problem.
Well, it's interesting because I said isekai is a virus. There is an isekai that is about being reincarnated as a virus.
I've heard of this one, actually.
Did you try and stump me on this one?
I think I might have.
Try. Keyword is try. It's not possible.
Oh,
the only time I stumped him was because it wasn't an actual... It wasn't a manga. It's that fencing book I keep talking about.
I think I got him with the very first isekai from the 60s that was never translated.
Yeah. This is called It's That Reincarnated as a Virus Story.
Again, it's on the tin. It says what it is.
I think the rule for isekai is you have to develop a working title for your series, and you have to go with it.
Yeah.
Like when you walk into the meeting to pitch your isekai, you got to come up with the title on the spot.
Input form for isekais, when you submit it into the world, there's a title field and a description field. So they have these great titles they put in, but for some reason, whatever the software is, there's a bug. It just takes the description as the title, and that's what it displays. And that's why all of them are just, their titles are just descriptions of what the story is about.
There's a couple alternate titles here.
Oh. I guess different translations.
The otherworldly infection story that started with a virus reincarnation.
That's a little more.
The first
that one still
three
tells
words,
you, but it's like a little bit. It's at least it's got a little bit more personality to it.
I don't think that's the official one.
It's still not good.
And then I don't know. Somebody must have put this one in as a joke. Plague Inc. in another world.
Yeah, somebody super put that in. Thought you were going to be like Osmosis Jones, the anime.
So what I would want to say to people is, if you enjoy a little bit, just a little, sort of emotional stories and like a little or a lot of romance and stuff like that, a lot of these shoujo manhwa, which is a really interesting word to say because shoujo is Japanese and manhwa is Korean. Don't ask me why they do that. But there's a lot of good ones out there. There's a lot of them in general, but there's a lot of good ones. And I know that those aren't for everybody, so I would want to temper those recommendations with, you sort of gotta be in for it to start, as opposed to some of our other recommendations, which are obviously like, everybody can enjoy this.
Well, intrepid listeners, I will go on safari into this genre for Professor Isekai Sensei-sama and report back next time of my findings as someone who's usually balks at a lot of these topics, so...
Well, I hope you enjoy them.
I genuinely, we just had a big conversation about being genuine, being empathetic. I genuinely hope I enjoy it. And I change my tune and turn over a new leaf.
I don't know. I like shoujo manga. I like Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon was reborn. She used to live on the moon.
I think you mentioned before that I'm going to have to talk to your wife about these.
You have to talk to my wife about yaoi hands.
I don't read those.
Well, that's evolving too. The hands are getting bigger.
There is a really weird
Yaoi
thing.
hands too. This time they're bigger. They're back and bigger than ever.
There's a lot of manhwa that are very inconsistent in their art.
But not in like a fun One Piece way.
Yes, and although I hate how One Piece does that.
I love how One Piece does it. It's part of the thing. I need to ask my gay friend who's very much into yaoi and has very strong opinions about yaoi hands.
They can paddle a boat with those things now.
Ben, they can paddle a lot of things, I'm sure.
So Ben,
Yes.
how did Ben's horror bullshit month go this past year?
It went great for me. I covered a bunch of short stories. I even covered a manga.
Yeah, that manga that you covered on Words About Books.
I did.
That your co-host seemed to love so much.
I'm assuming by your tone that was not the case of someone who didn't listen to this, as
No,
a
actually,
viewer who maybe didn't, or a listener who maybe didn't listen to that one.
I got the impression that he wasn't completely put off by it.
He didn't hate it.
So, okay, I guess a little preface. We're talking about Uzumaki by Junji Ito here. And my co-host hates Lovecraft. He doesn't like things that don't make sense, and that's the point. He hates that.
I can understand that.
I do agree with him somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
There's got to be a point to not having a point for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, Uzumaki is one of Junji Ito's, and I did that on Words About Books because it is a novel-length graphic novel. It's kind of a serial, but it has an overarching story that eventually ends. I guess I won't spoil it because that's
Please
kind
don't.
of the whole
I've never.
thing.
Yeah.
What I will tell you is if you ever played Bloodborne,
Ooh, I have.
I think Bloodborne was definitely influenced by Uzumaki.
Well, now I definitely got to read Uzumaki.
I think he might have even said that in an interview, that he was influenced by Uzumaki.
You should definitely read it before you listen to that episode of
Well,
Words
yeah,
About
I'll
Books.
spoil the
Should I read it before or after I read that manhwa, the Villainess manhwa?
You read it after. It'll take you a while.
First, read Volume 2 of Frieren,
Okay,
and
that is
then
sitting on my shelf.
you can decide if you want to be disgusted and horrified, or if you want to read Junji Ito.
Thank you. I was so ready to do that joke, and you were already on it. Big props, Brad.
So yeah, I guess I should explain, if you don't know who Junji Ito is, you almost certainly have seen one of his drawings. I think
Yes.
even people who don't read manga have probably seen at least one.
He's
So,
kind of permanent. This hole was made for me. It's
Yeah,
me
so I
size.
think probably
That's
most
like all I
people
know.
most people who've spent too long on the internet have probably seen, oh God, what's it called? The Mystery of
Ahigahara.
Fault.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
It's
that's a good one.
it's
guess I've been
this
spending
hole
time
was
on the
made.
internet.
It's that one you.
Oh, it's that one? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So the premise of which is, and this is all I know of Junji Ito, so I'm going to encapsulate this because I've only ever read one other one, which I'll also talk about in a minute. But the premise of
The Enigma
the ending.
of Ahigahara Fault.
So basically, some people are out hiking in Japan, and they find where an earthquake has occurred and a mountain has sort of split in half. And that's where the fault comes from. They're in Ahigahara, and there's a fault. What they find is that this fault is full of holes. And for some reason, all of the holes are human-shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are like, this is crazy. What's going on here? And there's a whole bunch of people go to this place to look at this because it's so strange. It's an enigma
Yes.
of Ahigahara Fault. It's like an isekai title. And so as all these people are looking at it, someone shouts, "This hole fits me perfectly. This hole was made for me." And everybody's like, "That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense." But this person, I think it was a woman, is like, "No, this is definitely my hole." And she goes in it. She fits it perfectly, and she goes into it and does not come back out. There's a whole bunch of other shit that goes on, but people keep finding their holes and going through their holes.
Yeah, and people are drawn to it. Like if they see the hole on the news, they have to go.
Right.
Oh,
And
I like
so
that. That's neat.
You have this stretch of time where people are just going in these holes, one after the
And
other.
just disappearing.
And at some point, someone's like, maybe there's some answer to this. And they decide to go to the other side of the mountain.
I think there's another earthquake that
Oh, is it?
that opens up the exit.
And so you wouldn't really know that you were reading Junji Ito if you hadn't, explicitly read his name until you get to the end of this, which it's fairly short. The person or people go to the other side of the mountain and see all these weird cracks and crevices on the other side. And they're like, "That's really weird. What does this match up with? Would something go in here?" And then all of a sudden they hear a sound. And there's like this sound coming from these holes. And they're like, "What is this?" And then out of the hole comes this horrible, twisted, distorted figure of the people who went in the other side.
Yeah, by centimeters, it just changes shape until you fall all the way through. And it just is a big body horror thing where it crushes your limbs. And
I need to read this because I can't visualize what you're talking about, and that's really exciting.
It's like a 5-minute read.
Because you're
it's real
you're
short.
explaining with like a really clear picture in mind, and I'm just not getting it. And again, that excites me as a thing that's like supposed to be horror and unnerving.
It's not from other Junji Ito things that I've seen. It's not like super horrible, but it was one that I saw when I was like 14.
Catches you at the right time.
And
yeah.
it was definitely the weirdest thing I'd ever seen at that point, which is saying a lot because I had seen a lot of weird shit by that point.
I was on the internet, so
No, Junji Ito definitely shines in the short story. If you were going to start reading Junji Ito, I'd recommend picking up one of the short story collections. I don't know which one the Enigma is
Now,
in.
I will say, and this is explicitly, I am saying this explicitly for my sister who may be listening to this.
Don't read it.
If you have trypophobia, which is a
fear of
fear
holes.
of lots of little holes and stuff, do not read The Enigma
Or
of
maybe do, it'll freak you
Ahigahara Fall.
out.
It is
That's
not
what you're
worth.
looking
It is
for.
not worth it. It is
Okay,
not.
okay.
There's
not worth
another
it.
one you have to avoid. Oh, I forget which one that is. You'll know it really quick when you start.
know
reading.
when you see a lot of tiny holes.
It's literally just about tiny holes opening in a person's skin.
Isn't that called Uzumaki?
No,
No.
that's spirals.
Uzumaki's
Oh.
about being driven mad by the spiral.
Okay. I think that's what I was thinking of.
And not the good kind, like in
Like in
Gurren
ramen.
Lagann.
Like in ramen.
Now I was thinking the three you've probably seen are the Enigma, the Tomie face picture, where it's like a normal girl's face, and then coming off of it is another monster face.
No, I don't.
Oh, that's if you look up Tomie, that's the one that's going to come up. I have a T-shirt of it. I wore it to the gym yesterday. And then I forget the story, but there's one where the kid's spying on his neighbor, and she turns around and she's like all corpseified.
No, in fact,
fun.
well, I can't say that I've never seen those, but I didn't see them in enough capacity that I remember them explicitly. The other single one that I do remember explicitly was, and I completely forget the name, unfortunately, but maybe you'll know it after I describe it to you. There's what I would call a drug going around. These people have a jug that they're drinking out of, and it's sort of like a liquor, and they drink it, and it makes them high. And then sometimes, after people drink it, they'll just explode. And it's not guaranteed, but if you get a group of people together and they all drink it, 2 or 3 of them will explode.
I don't know this one. There is
Weird.
one. There is one about a sake maker.
Well, it's not that.
Okay.
So what happens is, what we find out is there's this tree out in the middle of this jungle where they're getting this juice from. And it turns out that the tree is sort of dealing with pests. It knows when you drink its sap, and it swats you through space. And because over the course of the story, we find like, oh, there's like a second or two before people explode where there's like a giant hand-like thing that comes and hits them. Even if they're inside, it doesn't like crush the house. It
I
just
really need to get my hands on a Junji Ito short story
So-
book because this sounds incredible.
I could bring you some.
The thing is
wild.
these are the ways that I've seen Junji Ito, and they're honestly just crazy. Like, there's not a point to it. There's not a moral.
Nope.
The
It's
point is to
literally
unnerve
just,
you.
here's some crazy shit.
Yes, I'm down for that.
And so when you've talked to me about Junji Ito before, about like, oh yeah, like, and this one and that other, and I'm just like, why?
Well, I like horror. I will say Junji Ito, like, he's one of those people that I have never, first off, they've tried to animate it a bunch of times. They've tried to animate a ton of his stories. There's a live action movie adaptation of Uzumaki, which is
I don't think that's gonna be
hilarious.
good.
It's real funny. And it's not trying to be.
Good on purpose.
So he only works in comics. I don't think if he wrote these stories in a novel, they'd be any good. Because there's not much to the story.
It's the visual.
It's the combination of just enough story to kind of get you emotionally invested in what's going on, or at least feeling sympathetic or empathetic enough with the character that you're hurt when they're hurt. And then he does like a big stunning visual. And that's how most Junji Ito stories go. And that's why his long form stuff like Uzumaki, Gyo, They don't do as well. Tomie is pretty good. The Tomie collection. Tomie is a series of short stories where it's a recurring character he has, and Tomie is kind of its own urban legend. It's a girl. She's very pretty, like classically Japanese pretty, and she's 16, I think, and she always tries to seduce like rich men, and
Okay.
she will eventually make people obsessed with her, and without fail they always get obsessed with her to the point where she dumps them. She starts treating them like shit. She's mean to them, and then if they can't have her, no one can, and they chop her up into a bunch of little pieces, and each little piece grows into a new Tomie.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, and that's every Tomie story. And he finds really increasingly silly ways to use this. Like there's one town that gets taken over by Tomies, and the Tomies are trying to kill each other, but they try to kill each other by sending their men at one another. And so like there's just this town where young
That sounds
men
silly. That doesn't sound like anything else you've described from this man. So
like they're not all gems, but
It honestly just
Could they
sounds
be-
like he's just a deeply disturbed person.
if I told you
pretty
he
good
was a
art.
dental technician, would that help?
that feels like I would have thought he worked in an office.
no, you
but-
know what? That's spot
But
on.
I could get it.
Yeah, I mean, having to stare into people's mouths all day, I can see
see it.
that
So-
devolving into madness.
I think his first manga he sold, like he went to school as a dental technician, worked as a dental technician, and he was in charge of actually machining the tools. And he would, work for a dentist's office and he would make the tools. He has used that to make his own like pen nibs and stuff, and he attributes that to some of his unique art style. But he submitted to a manga contest while still working as a dental technician, and he continued to work full-time as a dental technician through like the first several years of his manga career.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he has another comic that's just about his cat. It's about his...
Spooky.
No, I mean, it's drawn the way he draws everything else.
So there's just an air of unease just by virtue of association.
I
It's
feel
just
like
about his cat, though, and his
sounds
wife.
pleasant.
And
I feel like if I read that, I would just the whole time I would turn the page slowly, just waiting for like, oh, the cat was actually some kind of eldritch horror.
tension that will never
Well-
abate because there is no tension, but you don't know that because
Right.
it's the Junji Ito art, so you get the like Pavlovian response.
And this is what I said on Words About Books is he is horror, and some of them are genuinely disturbing or scary, but I don't think he knows exactly what he's doing with that cat thing. Like, he knows what people are experiencing as they're reading these innocent stories about his cat, like where he doesn't clean the cat's litter box to the cat's specifications, and the cat gives him like a Junji Ito look. And he knows exactly what he's doing. And it's like with the Tomie one where the Tomies fight and some of the sillier bits of Uzumaki. Like, I think he thinks it's funny. He even writes like in the Uzumaki like special edition, there's a bunch of like after comics where like him and his editor go to the Uzumaki town and experience Uzumaki shit, and like he's got a sense of humor, and I think he just enjoys grotesque imagery.
Just messing with people.
I don't think it always needs to be scary. I think he just likes drawing creepy shit.
You know, it's so weird because like I feel like I'm someone who can understand other people, even if it's something like things that I don't personally enjoy. I can look at and go, oh, I can see why someone would like this, why they would want to have this thing or do this. This level of like just grotesque for grotesque's sake and horror for horror's sake kind of thing, I just don't get it.
I think I compared him to Geiger, who I don't know if he's ever listed Geiger as an influence or anything, but it's the way people enjoy Geiger and why they...
I guess I've never really experienced Geiger because when you say Geiger, I think of like Alien.
Yeah.
And I look at Alien and I'm like, okay, I don't really like horror that much, but I look at it and I go, okay, I get why this is compelling.
Because it's weird things that make you uncomfortable.
But I guess Geiger,
that's compelling about that.
Yeah, Geiger has a lot more than just he designed alien stuff, right?
Yeah, he was an artist. Like,
so when you say Geiger, there's probably another level there that I'm completely unaware of.
Or Hieronymus Vosch, or any of the like big horror painters.
I don't know who that is.
I've heard that name before.
But
Google these things, dear listener.
If you look up Hieronymus Vosch, he's if you can spell it, I'm not going to attempt.
Good luck.
But he drew he painted a bunch of paintings of hell and things like that, and they're disturbing and weird. And I don't know. I've tried to quantify why I like horror a bunch of times, and I can't, because there's other negative emotions that I'm not super attracted to. Like, I enjoy, a tragedy story when it's done well, but I don't like tragedy. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to like decorate my room with tragic horror or tragic movie posters. Like, I can only watch, Schindler's List so many times.
Christ.
Like, but I could watch Friday the 13th over and over.
Great, yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know why horror is. Maybe it's because I'm a person with an anxiety disorder.
That's
and it just
so
lets
weird.
me lean into it.
I definitely, I don't know that I have an anxiety disorder, but I experience unexplainable anxiety from time to time. And I don't get that at all. Like, that's not like, I don't want more anxiety, I want less.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a sense of control or experiencing fight or flight in a safe space, or I honestly feel like that sounds like a good explanation for it, but it also feels a little too deep. I don't think about it that much.
I mean, you like what you like. I get that.
But that's why
I like isekai a whole lot.
I do like that Ito's stuff sometimes has a sense of humor, because it is nice to get a relief. I like a sense of humor in a horror aesthetic. Like, I really like Scream or Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Or
what? I really liked Tucker and Dale versus Evil. I don't like horror, but that one just really did. I think because obviously it's a comedy.
Yeah.
Cabin in the Woods was another one that I enjoyed. I think I have to have a heightened level of comedy to go along with the horror.
Well, horror and comedy are already kind of the same thing. It's setups and payoffs.
Right.
That's true.
In one you laugh, and one you scream.
Yeah.
Or in some ways felt uncomfortable. Or sometimes humor makes you uncomfortable,
The crazy thing, though, about Ito as an artist is his people are not good. Like, he's not really, when he draws normal stuff, he's a competent artist.
That's interesting you say that, because I was just about to say that I sort of get Junji Ito from an art perspective, because I don't think that it's bad. It's not like excellent real life kind of thing, but there's an aesthetic to it that I understand sort of what's going on, especially because that style lends itself so much to the grotesque.
You can tell when he's drawing something he's interested in versus when he's drawing the setup stuff. Because like first off, when he does a scare, like when he really goes in for the visual scare, it's almost always on a page turn. And it is almost always like a full page, fully inked,
right?
Crazy detail. And that's where he shines. And that's why his art gets seen so much, even among people who don't care at all about manga. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm pretty sure my mom has seen a Junji Ito image. That's a tough one. Am I recommending it to people?
Well, so I was going to ask, like, technically speaking, this is our recommended segment.
Yeah, this one has a few.
Is there a way that
you've inspired me that I want to? I mean, I've always wanted to, but the fire has now been lit, so it's moved up the list.
Like, so far, I'm not going to read any of it. So, like, do you think there's a way that you could talk me into it?
If you're not into horror at all.
Did Junji Ito write any isekai?
Not that I'm aware of, unless you count Uzumaki.
You got your peanut butter into my chocolate.
I would say if you're not into horror at all, it's probably not your cup of tea. If you are into horror, but you're not into like the mind-bendy, Lovecrafty, cosmic nonsense stuff, you could stick to your Tomie. A lot of the short stories are good. If you're not sure if you can handle it, he did do an adaptation of Frankenstein.
Oh,
Weird.
that's interesting.
Like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So that might give you a little hint. You could at least look at the art and maybe see what we're talking
Do
about.
you know what the actual name of it is?
Frankenstein. It's there's a short story collection of Frankenstein and other works.
Oh, and it's in there among other things.
Yep.
Interesting.
That's an interesting enough premise that I might look that up, because the idea of his style telling the story of Frankenstein clicks in my brain.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Frankenstein's a little more straightforward story than he usually engages in.
Yeah. And then there's also an element to it of I know what the story is already.
But there's one about a jazz record, like a lost jazz record.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
They were recording.
Is it cursed?
It is cursed because you find out. I'll spoil it a little, but it's still an interesting story. You find out that it was a record from a famous jazz singer. She died, collapsed to the floor, but her corpse then sang the greatest jazz song of all time.
Love stuff like that.
And people who hear it need it. And there's only one recording of it because some guy in the booth flipped on the recording thing after she collapsed. And so there's only one record, and it's his bootleg. And that is the basis of the story.
I mean, that sounds interesting.
That one's not hyper violent
Yeah.
or anything.
I love stuff like that. That's like a weird urban legend thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, if it's like, 30, 60 pages or
It's
whatever,
short, yeah.
like I can muddle through something like that, even if I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be super interested, because the short stories, those are easy. Like I said, I've already read a couple. Just the second one, at least, that I mentioned about like the people are actually like mosquitoes to the tree or whatever. Like I knew that was Junji Ito when I started reading it. There was just I had seen an image.
Did you ever see the one with the balloons?
No. But
you'd know.
I had seen an image from it and got interested in it that way. And when I finished it, I was like, I didn't need to read that, but there was something intriguing enough that I sought it out and was like, I'm going to check this out. And actually that one was where I was like, you know what? I don't need Junji Ito.
One of the Junji Ito tropes that I love is like an absurd thing that is so absurd, it is like reality breaking happens, and then the shoe doesn't drop for a while.
Yeah.
Like the balloon one, there's this town where these giant balloons that look exactly like people who live in the town show up and start hovering around.
But giant.
My gosh,
Yeah.
yes.
And then they don't do anything
That's fine.
for a minute. And people just have to live with this.
That's I want to read that. That sounds interesting. It's just weird ideas.
Oh, and it ends on one of the greatest Ito shock gags. Because it's a subtle one. I mean, it's not as over the top as like the Uzumaki or the Tomie getting chopped up. But yeah.
I guess I have to take back what I said, because at the very least, there's one more that I'm going to read. So
I'd say if you have any interest in horror, read Ito. But in this case, I'd say maybe don't. If you're somebody who has any phobias or any like triggering topics, don't worry so much about the spoilers. Go ahead and figure out what you're getting into before you read. And because often I think it's like, you know, like we say with JoJo, it's kind of hard to spoil Ito.
Yeah.
I can tell you exactly what.
You
Yeah,
just got to take it in. It's a vibe.
I can tell you what happens in Uzumaki, and it's not going to really make a ton of difference.
Well, right, because it's the art and the expression of it that's the point.
It's really all in how you get there.
It's
Yeah.
a tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tone. It's a vibe. Feeling.
So this is definitely different from usual because we're not coming out with a glowing endorsement of something that everybody should read, but at the very least, if this is the kind of thing that you're interested in, right?
Oh yeah,
I am.
definitely.
I gotta check it out now.
Definitely.
I was inspired.
Yeah, I'd just say be mindful. You know, if you have any content that's triggering to you, basically, you know, it's a horror thing. It gets real graphic. So if any of that you could imagine would be triggering, check out some review of the story first and see if it sounds like material that's probably too much, because it's not something you must put yourself through a bad time to read. I wouldn't say it's that good.
Yeah.
But if you like horror, if you can stomach it, go nuts.
And you know what? I'll say this to our listeners. If you go out and you read some Junji Ito, let us know. Leave a comment. You can leave a comment on Good Pods. I check those out. You can go on our YouTube channel where we simulcast this podcast. You can leave a comment there. You can reach out on Twitter. Let us know. Like, did you take our recommendation, or rather Ben's recommendation here, and enjoy it, or
Is your life ruined?
or do you want to? Do you
Is
want
your life improved? You never know.
right? Or do you want to come back and yell at Ben and say, you know, you're terrible. Why did you do this to me?
I found this hole that was me sized and I can't get out.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Well, that will wrap up episode 3 of That Time I Got Reincarnated in the Same World as an Anime Podcaster.
Woo.
I had fun as usual. How about you guys?
Ganbare.
Yeah, it's a good time.
So thanks for listening. If you have been, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it to make sure that you get updates whenever they come out. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you do that kind of thing. And on our YouTube channel, which is That Time I Got Reincarnated as an Anime Podcaster, we put up a little bonus thing that we do on the YouTube channel, which is called Unboxing, where we unbox a Japanese snack box that we get every month. We have a lot of fun doing that. And one of those went up just about 2 weeks ago. So you can check that out. You can find me to talk about the podcast on Twitter at Isekai Sensei. And you can email to isekaisenseisama@gmail.com. Check us out on Good Pods. You can leave a rating there, and you can also leave a review of specific episodes. And I'll get those and respond. And I like to hear from people. So, Ben, you got some plugs.
Yeah, you can check me out on Words About Books, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm also on Twitter at Benbo Swaggins. Check me out. If you read your Junji Ito comic and you're the better for it, go ahead and tweet me. You can follow the Words About Books Twitter at WABpod. You can see Words About Books streaming every Monday at twitch.tv/wordsaboutbooks.
Cool. Andrew, you got anything you want to plug?
Yep, you can catch me on my podcast feed, Ramble Rousers, which is kind of whatever strikes me, interviews with my friends and the cool stuff they do, other things similar to this show. It's been a little bit a while, but you know, always good to subscribe to that. You never know when something's going to show up. You can also check out my YouTube channel, which is very similar, but video over audio at Kermit the Grog on YouTube. So subscribe to that for some fun content.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So once again, thanks for listening. And remember, if you wake up as Villainess, I'd recommend befriending the heroine.